Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sail Faster. Today's episode is going to be a bit different. It's more serious, perhaps, but it's an incredibly important topic. It's a conversation I think that could truly save lives. And we're diving into a critical topic, which is safety at sea. So this discussion feels especially timely in light of the recent tragic loss of two sailors during the Hobart race, which, of course, was a pretty sobering reminder of how vital preparation and awareness are out on the water. So joining us today is someone who's made it his mission to keep sailors safe, and that's John Schafer. Many of you will know John from his Ministry of Sailing website and business, where he provides things like safety certifications, flare disposal service, and countless other resources to ensure safer journeys for sailors everywhere. So we're going to be discussing with John how to prepare properly, whether it's coastal or offshore racing, how to maintain a safety culture, and the really key topic of risk management in those situations. So hang on to the lifelines and let's get into it. John, hello from obviously snowy Wisconsin.
Yeah. I'm in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, hoping to do some ice boating this week. It looks perfect. There's literally a piece of glass out there. It's going to be fantastic.
These ice boats go like 70 miles an hour, don't they?
Yeah. We're hoping it's 70 to 80 this weekend.
Okay, that is a whole different safety conversation there. So, John, tell us about Ministry of Sailing. What's that all about?
So, Ministry of Sailing started actually when COVID shut down the world. It was March 2020. We had just finished the Heineken Regatta. And I was sitting there with a bunch of the guys that I race with, and I was fortunate enough to be chosen to be on a Volvo 65. And so it's a pretty powerful race boat. And COVID shut down, and I was there with a bunch of former military friends of mine that I've been sailing with for years and years. And we have always had in our mind to do a certification for a sailing rescue swimmer. Some of the gentlemen that I work with and some of the guys that I race with, these are techniques that we've used on some boats like the Volvo Ocean race, stuff like the Clipper race, and some really high performance turbo boats. Because one of the problems that you have is when you have a man overboard, when you have 3 head sails up, it's going to take you sometimes miles to turn around. And by the time you get the boat under control to turn around, then it's going to be the search and rescue for your person in the water. And depending on water temperature, it could be a person is immobilized within 30 minutes just because of the temperature alone. When a person can't help themselves to get on a boat, you really have to start thinking about how to get the person back on the boat. There's too many stories of losing people in those situations. And so we just started putting an outline together how we're going to write the certification, because it's really important that as people start seeing these things happening on the internet, or if they see it in person, that they don't try it themselves, that they understand that you need the right personal protection equipment, you need the right training, and you have to have the right events that are going to be in place. And a lot of people will say, well, why would you put a second person in the water? Right? You're doubling the risk. But risk can be mitigated, and that's my background is mitigating risk. With a professional, with the right training, you start cutting down on doubling the risk, because now you have a trained professional, and that's what we're looking at as a new profession in the industry, providing jobs, providing education, and providing the resources and how people can mitigate their risk. And so that's how it started. And then we had to name the company. Half of my company are Brits, New Zealanders, and we're deciding what to name the company. And we went through every name in the world. And as the night got longer, we started talking about this bar in the United Kingdom called the Ministry of Sound. And all of a sudden, all of us at the same time said the Ministry of Sailing. So that's how the Ministry of Sailing started. We checked the internet, it was open, and we had a website the next day. So that's when we started producing this certification project. And so now we have the Sailing Rescue Swimmer certification. There's going to be some news coming out in the near future that you're going to see some pretty popular yacht clubs that are going to start hosting this before some of their big races, hosting the event before some of their bigger races. So you're going to start seeing these things pop up, similar to a safety at sea. I'm also a moderator for U.S. Sailing Safety at Sea. So if you go to the Safety at Sea courses, the chances are probably 1 out of 18 you might get to see me as well.
Yeah, I did the Safety at Sea course a couple of years ago now, and not surprisingly, it was very sobering. But the rescue swimmer is really interesting, because that's quite new, isn't it? Because there is that dilemma of, do you put a second person into the water, and then are you then rescuing 2 people? I know that's not the intent of it, but
correct.
That must have been something to think through quite good.
Absolutely. There was a lot of pro sailors that say never do that. But then you have the other half that have had experiences where they see how difficult it is. And I think when you think about that a man overboard situation is really based on three phases. The first phase is to control the vessel, right? The second phase is to attach the person to the boat, whether it's a line, whether it's a life line. But the most difficult thing, and the thing which is least practiced, is getting that person back on the deck of the boat, all right? Because it's going to take three persons minimum, all right, to pull a person back on the boat without the use of some sort of aids. But if you think about it, you have three people reaching over the boat, trying to pull a person whose center of gravity is 3 feet below the water line. It's almost impossible. Very few people, when they practice man overboards, very few actually practice that last phase of getting the person out of the water. And I like to say that your man overboard drill is incomplete if you don't practice retrieving a person out of the water.
Yeah, thinking back to when I did the sort of US sailing course originally, you'd throw fenders overboard, tie a couple of fenders overboard and throw them aboard. And the key emphasis was on probably keeping track of where that person was in the water and then learning how to turn the boat to get yourself in a position to bring them back up. But it was boat hook up the fenders. It's pretty easy to pull fenders on board, but to replicate that with, as you're right, a 200-pound soaking wet, maybe quite frightened person is completely different. Presumably, if you have 4 or 5 on the boat, one person or maybe 2 people have got to concentrate on keeping the boat in the right direction or at the right angle.
Right.
So you start to run out of people to pull somebody over on board anyway.
Yeah, exactly right. Because all of a sudden you're down a key person, right? And so you still have to control the boat. And a lot of people, when they practice just by throwing throw your fender over, that's a boat maneuverability problem. What people fail to understand is the sea state and the boat will dictate where that person is actually brought up inside the boat. I mean, a lot of people say, well, we'll just throw off the swim leg. Well, if you have a heaving boat going up and down in waves, you're going to crush the person. We have instances of 3 to 4 passes trying to pull a person in. A person can't help themselves. And you hit the person. And unfortunately, we've had situations where the hit was so hard on the individual, they lost the person altogether. That last phase of getting that person on the boat is really the most critical and the least practiced. So we really need to start emphasizing how to practice getting that person and understanding the tools that are on the boat to deal with that. And it takes lots and lots of practice. And I just, if anything brings anything out of this conversation you and I are having, hopefully it's the practice getting that person out of the water. And I think it also brings up the question, when it comes to what can happen on the boat, and then are you prepared to manage that? And I think that's one of the key aspects of leadership for skippers, to understand that they are the ones who are primarily responsible for every soul that's on that boat. And that means that they have the responsibility to do the safety, to do the training. One of the things is the constant safety briefing, which we talk about. The safety briefing shouldn't just occur right before you get on the boat or the once a month. On some boats with multiple halyards, you might have a rescue halyard that's always identified. All right, we're on this jibe, we have this halyard's free, so here's our rescue halyard. Or on this jibe, this halyard's free, this is our rescue halyard. So that constant safety briefing has to go on throughout, whether you're day racing, whether you're on a day sail, whether you're doing offshore racing, whether you're doing 3 or 4 day distance races. I think that constant safety briefing has to go on, and every shift change, just do a refresher brief. That's how you build a culture of safety on a vessel.
You and I talked a couple of days ago. I think we talked about skiing. And I remember when I first learned to ski, probably 30 years ago now in California, hardly anybody wore helmets. When snowboarders came on, they wore helmets, started wearing helmets. And now, of course, everybody is. It makes absolute sense. And I just wondered if you think there's any chance of sailing going, sort of going that way, where it becomes something that's just a normal part of the equipment.
Well, I think what people are starting to realize, number one, thanks to the NFL, there's a lot more awareness of what happens over repeated concussions. I don't know too many sailors who have not been hit in the head by a boom. And if you haven't, you probably haven't been sailing very long. All right. The research is there showing that the head injuries are critical. Now when we start thinking about some of the loads that we're experiencing in heavier winds, or based upon the size of a vessel, you're starting to see more and more people doing it. Some of the universities around the United States now, it's a requirement for them to wear a helmet while they're racing the universities. In some countries, the youth are also wearing helmets all the time in some countries. All right, so we're starting to see more development of that. Now, if we think about, like what you said, culture is changing, right? You look at the NHL 30 years ago, they didn't wear a helmet, and the goalies didn't wear helmets. Now they've gone from helmets to face shields into neck guards. All right. So you can't find any child on the ice any longer without a helmet on. And so that takes almost a generation to change that culture. And so, yes, I think a generation from now, you're going to see more and more helmets. You're seeing them now on some of the bigger boats. If you look at some of the big J boats that they're racing, most of those crews on the bow are wearing helmets these days because there's a lot of hardware and the forces that are involved. It just takes one mishap, and then the head injury ends up an unconscious person, and an unconscious person ends up in the water, and now you're in a situation that could have been controlled, and now becomes almost uncontrollable. And remember, the loads and speed of the vessels are increased so much now that you can get a head injury just by falling off a boat when you're going over 20 knots. And so there's probably a million reasons not to wear a helmet, but there's only one reason to wear it. It's going to save your life.
The other thing that's probably fostered some interest in helmets is probably just SailGP and the America's Cup, right? Which I know, foiling boat extreme speeds, but sometimes the sort of trailblazers like that can make it common for others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not telling people just to go out and buy a helmet either. We looked at and did a lot of research of this, and we think that snow ski helmets are probably most applicable because they're built to a standard. All right. What's nice about the snow ski helmets is they're designed for a liquid, although it's snow, a water type of environment. And we think that the impacts are very similar to that what the snow skiers are wearing, and the loads would be probably equivalent as well.
John, is there a time when having the right safety measured for you personally prevented perhaps something at sea becoming worse than it was?
I want to say a few years ago, I think it was 2019, we did the Bermuda Ocean Race on my boat, which was Catalina 445. And I think as much as the preparation that I put into it, I didn't realize one design flaw that made a difference for us. So the hatches on the windows, one of them had a single hatch and was glued on. So the handle was actually glued on. And through a spinnaker change mishap, a line got stuck on that and ripped off that handle because it was glue, which made it very, very difficult for us to close. And as a matter of fact, we couldn't fix it given the high water environment, and we didn't have a screw to put through it either. So it was a lack of preparation on our part and a lack of realization on how fragile that was. When the seas actually got up to a state that were about 20 feet, we had to put the vessel in a position of which that we stopped taking water in. And so that ended our race. And for me as the skipper, I couldn't move deeper into a higher risk situation by moving away from the closest point of land, having, an 18-inch hole open above the vessel pouring in water. And it was at that point I realized that as much as preparation that we did do, I didn't realize the risk of having that glued on. Now, the glues in most instances are going to be fine, but if they get hit with any lateral force, that's what happens. So from now on, whenever I have boats like that, I just go buy another handle, plastic handle, and I screw it in the proper way so has a stronger lateral force. So yeah, that was like, we all wanted the race. We were doing really well. I think we were in our class, we were the third out of the bay, but it was just a situation that, I just couldn't see bringing everybody further away from ashore when land was closer.
That would have been almost impossible to predict, right? How do you prepare for? I mean, I know now you realize, but before it happens, right? It's very hard to prepare for something.
Well, usually when I step on the boat, the first thing I'm asking a lot of questions. And I
Yeah,
think these are good questions for anybody to step on a boat to ask. I think number one, show me the DSC button. How many people have a radio with DSC on them, but how many people don't know how to use and flip up the emergency distress button,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
How many people have MFDs, right? Multifunctional displays, but how many people actually have that MFD labeled for the MOB button? Right. So there's a difference on many of them by just hitting the mark and hitting the man overboard button. For me, one of the most important questions to ask for anybody getting on the boat is show me how the preventer works. That's a great one. And if people and if skippers aren't walking through this when you're stepping on a vessel, I think it's going to be very important for you to think about, well, give me the safety briefing. I mean, you might be on a boat every single time and think, well, I've been on this boat before. But let's think about the airplane. Every time you get on an airplane, whether you like it or not, you're going to get a safety briefing. It's a reminder, all right? It's a reminder that things can happen. As unlikely as they might be, bad things do happen every single day. Safety on a vessel comes from leadership. I would go as far as saying you can't have safety without teamwork, and you can't have teamwork without leadership. So I think it's a circle that goes around and around. And so if you're concerned about safety, you're concerned about teamwork. So you're spending time on these things. And so when you're getting on the water, we know it's dangerous. We really need to start thinking about safety every single time we're on the boat and having those conversations. I think another critical aspect of leadership for skippers is to, when you get done with the race, when you get done with the sail, to ask a very simple question. And I do this every single time I race and every single time I'm on the water. I ask people before we get off the boat and we go in a circle, what did you learn today? And then you can learn from other people. That way you learn other lessons. And I've never been on a boat when I haven't learned something. The other thing I think a leader needs to do when we're talking about safety and security is foster an environment that the person with the least experience on the boat can ask a question and feel free to ask that question. We have to enable the people on our team to ask the questions when they don't understand or they don't see something. Not everybody's at the expert level. I think sailing on every single boat shouldn't be a landing pad, a place for everybody to land and stay on that boat. It needs to be a launching pad, a place that people can learn and go from there, take their sailing experience to other boats and move up to other levels, or even buy their own boat, be a team leader.
So I imagine a safety briefing on an offshore race or maybe a coastal distance race is one thing that I'm going to guess is practiced very widely. Do you recommend a particular safety briefing for inshore? I mean, I'm not including offshore because they'll have their own, but inshore racing perhaps?
Well, I think your safety briefing is going to change based upon a couple different things. I think your safety briefing should always include the temperature of the water. Temperature water is important because then you're going to know how long you have to recover a person. How long is it going to take for them to become immobilized? I think your safety briefing is going to talk about the weather, what's expected. I mean, hopefully everybody's starting to understand using that CAPE index, which is going to give us the likelihood of severe thunderstorms happening in the area. All right. So that's going to change your briefing as well. So your briefing is going to change based upon the circumstances that occur every single day. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the skipper. I love to hand out my briefing card and say, here, give the safety briefing. All right. That's a great way to build and develop team leadership and empower people and then teach them how to present themselves in front of the rest of their crew. So there's a lot of things that you can do because no 2 days are the exact same. The other thing is, I think we need to talk about, if we reflect upon the Sydney Hobart recently, the zone of death. A friend of mine said we used to call that triangle of pain or that area where there's lots of loads. It's kind of like Glasgow, right? They used to call them Glasgow on the clipper ships. Nobody likes to sit there, but you just like to move through it. So those areas that you move through as quickly as possible, those are going to be key elements of safety that you're going to be bringing in. As you get a higher wind day, the traveler could break and you don't want to be standing in that area. If you lose a line, those are the things that are going to be very important. And every boat has those triangles of death, or what I call the triangles of a certain pain.
So one of my best friends lives in Glasgow, so I do hope he doesn't listen to this conversation.
I was using that. See, I said somebody else told me that. That wasn't me.
You talked about a briefing card there. Do you have a briefing card available on our Ministry of Sailing, or
Yeah,
so people can look at it and copy it?
Yeah, it's on the website. If you go to the Department of Learning on their website, there's briefing cards and there's briefings that are available. And I'll give everybody a hint right now. There's not a product that you cannot buy in the world that is not on the internet that has a white background. And so what you can do is you can organize those products on your boat so you have the exact product and what it looks like on your boat diagram, and you can point particularly to what that looks like on your boating diagram. Those safety cards are very important because you have to remember that people learn in 3 different ways, right? You have that tactile learning. They have to do it to understand. You have the audible learning, all right? And then they have the visual learning. And so when you use a card for your safety briefings, you're always pointing to these things, or you're pointing to the actual areas. And so you're hitting every way that people learned in the safety briefing. So you're hitting them in multiple directions. And I think it's really important, again, have each and every one of your crew rotate on who's giving that safety briefing this week.
I do have a couple of people on my crew who are very safety conscious. My bow person, Cynthia, does a lot of long distance offshore sailing. She's very, very safety conscious. Yeah.
So I would empower that person if you have that. And if you have those people that are safety conscious, make them the safety officer. Once we start empowering people to be that safety officer, hey, design the safety. Skippers have enough to do. A skipper's job is to manage the boat. When you're driving a boat, you're making 7 to 10 decisions every second. And you're feeling the boat, you're feeling the waves, you're feeling the vibrations. Your eyes are fixed on the location that you're going. As soon as you take your eyes off, what happens, and this happens to everybody, as soon as you take your eyes off of your mark, wherever you're racing to, your hands stop moving. And as soon as your hands start moving, you're either heading up or you're heading down. And same thing with safety. You can't do it all.
So, John, if I'm preparing for an offshore race, that's presumably a whole different set of protocols versus an inshore race, or not? What do you think?
Well, a lot of people might say that. I think, but the only thing that changes is the availability of how long it takes someone to come and rescue you. Offshore, you need to start becoming more self-sufficient. I mean, I've sailed on the bay for the last 20 years, right? Sometimes the ocean comes to us. It goes from the light winds to the heavy winds. And when it comes very quickly. We've all been in those situations. And so the preparation comes, what happens when that comes to you? All right, so your readiness has to be ready to be able to manage when those bad things happen. Let's just take a man overboard situation as an example. If we get somebody overboard, we do a lot of training. I'm talking about training again, about what to do to retrieve a person who's in the water. But do we train our people when they fall in the water what they need to do? All right, I was coming in on a leisure cruise into Annapolis, right downtown, where a paddleboarder fell off, had the gasp reflex, and they drowned. All right. And so we're in the middle of a grid search looking for a person as we're coming in for our holiday weekend in Annapolis. All right. So do we train people how to actually fall in the water? When the water is of a certain temperature, you can get that gasp reflex. So are we telling people that when you lose your balance, when you see yourself going into the water, to cover your face? Are you doing that thing to hold your breath? Expect that. When they do hit the water, what's the first thing you do? In a racing situation, you want to make sure you're visible so the boat behind doesn't hit you. The other thing is look around. If you turn around in a racing situation, the likelihood of the closest boat to pull you out of the water might be behind you, not your boat. All right. When you hit the water, what safety equipment do you have? Where are your tools? You need to get yourself to relax, take some deep breaths, and calm yourself down in the water. So, yeah, if our number one fear is people landing in the water, let's train them how to land in the water. Some really good tools out there.
Presumably, part of that is also having the right PFD. If you get hit by, I'm at the back of the boat, I get hit by the boom, go over and stunned, then having the right PFD will at least get you the right way up.
Yeah, for me, the right PFD is the one that people wear. But there are some that might actually help you if you are in a situation where the loads are such that you might get hit and be unconscious, then you wear a helmet.
What's your advice for ensuring that everybody on board understands and adheres to safety protocols?
Well, all right. So I like to call this the rules of racing, or I'll say the 4 rules of teamwork. All right. The first rule of teamwork is keep water out of the boat. All right. Of course, these are the things that you do to supply everybody with the things that they need in order to prevent the boat from sinking. You make sure you do all of your safety stuff to make sure all the fittings are correct and look for those things that might cause things to not work properly, right? So that's what you're doing. The second thing is going to be keep people in the boat. All right. Rule number 2, keeping people in the boat means you're going to provide them with the resources they need to do their job. You're going to support them. All right. Remember, every single time somebody steps into or onto your boat, they're stepping away from somebody who loves them or something else. All right. Most likely they're not professionals. They're not getting paid for this. They're stepping away. And so they're giving you their time. And so you want to support them with the tools they need to do their job correctly, whether that's training. All right, whether that's an experience. Some people are looking to have fun experience. Nobody likes to be on a boat where they don't have fun. So part of the skipper's job is to provide that type of environment. All right, you want to give them the tools they need to do their job and in a way they want to do their job, so they can do that. Rule number 3: don't hit anybody. That's conflict management. All right, there's going to be conflict on your boat, and conflict which is unspoken is conflict which is unresolved. I like to say there's no risk whispering allowed on my boat. And this goes into safety. The reason is because when there's whispering, there's dissension. You hear stuff like, well, I wouldn't do it this way on the boat, or he's not doing it the right way, or she's doing this. You have to foster this environment. And as a leader, you need to stop those things from happening and encourage these things to be spoken in a way that people understand what's going on. So this whispering leads to dissension. And in an emergency, dissension leads to hesitation. Hesitation can lead to a greater crisis. So in an emergency, you want people to be trained so they know what to do, they understand what their responsibilities are, what their roles are, and hopefully you've practiced this in emergency. So it's the first time you're pulling somebody out of the water isn't in a man overboard situation. You've already practiced these situations, these skills, and you understand the tools to use on your boat. Those are what's critical. And the 4th rule is have fun doing it. Everybody likes to be part of a team. Everybody has an internal sense of belonging. You want to build a boat identity. So at the end of the day, at the end of the party, other teams say, you guys got a great boat. Win or lose, we want to be on your boat. You want to shake hands with your competitors and leave the battle on the water. That, I think, is successful.
The key thing for me is about trying to make sure that everybody feels they can speak up. I was reading some study recently, it was sort of, about team management. And the example they gave were airlines, where there have been a number of accidents over the years where the co-pilot or first officer didn't want to speak up. He knew that the captain was making a mistake or heading into problems, but felt that he didn't have the authority to speak up, and that was a disaster. So the airlines spend a lot of time making sure that everybody has the right to call and say, I'm not sure about this, without prejudice whatsoever. I've tried to practice that from a tactics point of view, but it's really interesting from a safety point of view as well. If somebody thinks you're doing something that's not quite safe, or perhaps a piece of equipment on the boat could be different or changed or whatever it is, in order to facilitate a higher environment for safety, that's something.
Absolutely right. It comes down to two things. That's called crew resource management. And you're right. The Air Forces and the airlines spend a lot of time in crew resource management, and we need to learn from that as well. The only time I like to hear anybody raise their voice in a way that has urgency is the word stop. All right. I think that needs to be our clear word when we see a safety thing, just to stop. That means everybody stops everything and we address what the emergency is. So we need to empower everybody when they see something to say stop when they see something that might be dangerous. The last thing you want to have is an incident on a boat where somebody, whether it's an equipment failure, whether it's a procedure problem, the last thing you want to have is somebody say in your after action review, yeah, well, I didn't feel like I could say something. It's absolutely disastrous. All right. And that's a failure of leadership. And that's why I really drive hard on this idea that safety and teamwork and leadership, they don't happen in a vacuum. They have to happen all together. So as a leader, you're building the safety, you're building your teamwork, and you're building your team. That's how you win. And winning isn't necessarily getting across the finish line first. It's meeting the expectations of the people on your boat. That's winning. And that's how you know that your team is there. So defining what winning is, winning is, at the end of the day, you performed to meet your expectations.
Yeah, I like the pre-race briefing where before we leave the dock, just like many others do, is think about, hey, what's our goal for today? While we're talking about teams, can we talk about communication? Because that team communication has got to play a really critical role when it comes to emergencies. And is that something that you think teams should practice, or at least have an agreed plan of how you communicate what's going on?
Absolutely correct. I think if I bring my football background into some of this as well, I think it would be helpful. Again, the first time you want to practice emergency is not in the emergency. All right. The first time you want to run a 2-point extra point for on a football team isn't the first time you run that play. It's practice, practice, practice. Right. So you need to be able to develop some systems on your vessel to practice what an emergency is. All right. So how are you going to do that? Well, it's simulation. Again, I said before, you want to use those days where you're not sailing, those light air days. So if you're going to practice these emergencies, it's going to be really important for you to identify what is the most likely emergencies to have. So you're doing a 105, right? So with the 105s, what are your, most typical emergencies, or what are the most dangerous situations you're going to be in? Once you identify what those are, what is your plan to train to, number one, avoid those? How do we identify that situation? And what words are we going to use for that? Like if I'm calling an audible, all right, as a quarterback, I'm not going to say the whole play. I have one key word for that play. If I can bring it down to one, 3-syllable word, everybody knows what that maneuver is or what that play is going to be. All of a sudden, you're increasing, all right, your ability to understand that using less words to communicate. You need to find a way for your team to identify when the situation occurs and how they can communicate that. Whether that's a person who's looking underneath the sail, all right, who's seeing the blind side. How do you communicate what that risk is? There's way too many times where I've heard people say, well, I saw that boat coming and I was saying something. But remember, communication is sending a message is heard, and then you have to respond, I've seen that message. These are things that need to be practiced and they need to be, I'm not going to say enforced, but we need to enhance those teams when they're doing that. So you identify the risk, you communicate the risk, and then you have that mitigation plan. Is this really a risk or not? So you need to practice things every single day you're out there, because every single time we're out there, we're in different risk situations.
What's the most common mistake that sailors make during emergencies?
I think the most common mistake is the lack of practice, and they haven't practiced what that situation is going to be. I think the other problem is they don't use names. And practicing leadership in emergency situations means you need to start telling people what to do when it comes to that by using names instead of somebody, because by doing that, you're causing someone to, to grab attention. So they might be panicking in their brain, but as soon as you call their name, they're going to look at you and then they're going to take a breath and then you're going to give them exactly what to do. That's really important, especially when you're got a person in the water and they may or may not be able to grab a line. When you call their name, grab the line. Suddenly, they take them out of that panic mode, all right, and it gets them into a rational mode. Remember, your brain is right and left. One side is reactionary, and the other side is going to be rational. All right, so you're going to have to tell sometimes people when they're in the reactionary mode to get out of that reactionary mode and go into rational by commanding them to do something and calling their name.
So for beginner sailors, especially those sort of beginner sailors who perhaps a race boat, stepping on a race boat for the first time, what's the one safety lesson you wish they knew? I'm sure there's 100, but is there one fundamental safety issue or protocol or idea that you'd want to make sure they knew?
I think if I were to say the one thing that everybody should probably know, it's how to communicate in an emergency. Everybody should be able to know how to pick up the microphone and communicate in an emergency. And I mean, you can get a free sticker from the Coast Guard Auxiliary that has steps 1 through 9 written down there, because the faster you communicate in an emergency, the faster help's going to be there.
And you put a sticker by the radio,
right by the radio,
down below, or
1
maybe
through
attached
9.
to the back of a handheld.
Yeah, and then besides that, always keep another radio on channel 16, the hailing frequency. Yeah. Always keep.
I think you have to do that, don't you? I think legally you have to have, if you have a radio on, you have to have it monitoring 16.
And it's almost in every single offshore rule. But yeah, I think if you have a radio, it has to be monitoring 16.
So John, I knew this was going to be a fascinating conversation. I didn't realize how much I would take away from this. I need to listen to this back and write down literally 20 things that I need to think about and put in place for this year. The Ministry of Sailing website has quite a lot of this on there. Where would you direct people to learn more?
A couple different places. The internet's always great. The Ministry of Sailing has its own YouTube, and we've been analyzing mishaps around the world for the last year now. I'm happy to say we've received 9,000 subscribers now and over 500,000 views. I'm going through almost every single module of Safety at Sea, and in 8 to 12 minutes trying to pick 1 or 2 things out that I think are very critical based upon accident investigations and reports on how to do things different. I've got one coming up where it's unfortunate, but there's a guy's got 250,000 views on the wrong way to put up a preventer. And it's been proven to be wrong, but he's got 250,000 views, which means if people are thinking this is the right way, and he's a trainer, I mean, he's missing a whole accident investigation based upon why you don't do this. And so if I can pull those things out and help sailors understand that there's a lot of information and everybody's learning on YouTube, but just because a person puts it on YouTube, it's important to understand the safety that goes about that and what the principles are, because there's a lot of stuff out there that's not real. So one of the things you're going to see if you watch the Ministry of Sailing YouTube is we're pointing to the offshore special regulations. So it's not my opinion. These are based on accident investigations over the years and years of experience that we're sharing. We're sharing the right way that the OSRs are putting these together. And it's the same training that you would get as a Safety at Sea, but we're doing an 8 to 12 minute module. Everyone's going to be different. Sometimes you'll see me pick on YouTubers. Sometimes I'll pull out the positive. Like we did one on the positive recovery of the man overboard during the Chicago Mac race. I mean, the guy had all the stuff ready. It was all based on training. In 20 minutes, they had the guy picked up at night, right? We had the other one at the Sydney Hobart. There's going to be another one we're doing on that one. The Sydney Hobart man overboard. They had all the right equipment. The team was trained. They picked the guy up in an hour. Absolutely fantastic. Imagine that. So now we're seeing mishaps which would have happened and have led to tragedy in the past being mitigated by technology and doing that and through training. So it's not technology alone, it's still the training that goes behind it. So that's what we're doing is we're really looking at putting the safety. We have a new product that we can come on for a new boat owner. We will come onto the boat, and before they purchase the boat, we'll take the offshore special regulations. We'll break down based on their intended use what safety equipment they might want to consider purchasing, so they can include that into the loan to the boat, so they don't have to buy the $15,000 to $20,000 of extra equipment later based on their intended use. They can just build it in. That's some of the things that we're doing and walking them through that. And then we always point to the Safety at Sea. because it's, as you said, you learn so much from those safety at sea. So those are the things we're doing with the Ministry of Sailing, and we do deliveries here and there and stuff like that. I got a question for you. I mean, you asking me questions. I got one for you guys. How come whenever there's a T-bone, it's a J105?
Well, I think that's probably a bit unfair in strong winds. The mainsail has really strong loads on it.
Oh yeah,
I think all of us have experienced that thing where the main trimmer can't unlock it, and you lose the ability to steer the boat. Basically, someone's come. You're trying to, if you're trying to duck somebody and you can't release that mainsail, you lose directional stability. I wonder if that's part of it.
So now that you said that, let's go back into risk mitigation. Now that you know that's a risk, how do you mitigate that? How would you mitigate that if you know that's being a risk?
So what I did when I heard about this and experienced it was to switch to trigger release, so that no matter what the load is on the sail, it's quite easy to actually pull down, which opens the jaws so that the main sheet can fly.
Great.
I've got one or two different mainsail trimmers. I always talk to them about, remember, if it loads up, pull down on it. And so that's one thing I've done for that.
That's awesome. So you just told me three things. All right. The first thing you told me is, number one, part of mitigation is develop awareness. Number one, be aware of the risk. The second thing you've done is you look at the mechanism for an equipment failure and you've replaced that to lessen the likelihood of that happening. That's great. The third thing you told me is you train someone. This is what you need to do when you feel that the load's going on. So those are three things that everybody should do, and realize that's how you mitigate risk. Develop awareness, look at equipment failures, right? Replace that, and then train the people how to do it, use it. That just brings up a last thing. Every piece of safety equipment is useless without the training that goes behind it. I'm working on YouTube right now where they had all the equipment. They had the man overboard module. All right. They had a life sling. They had cushions they could have thrown overboard. They lost the guy because they had the equipment, but nobody was trained on how to use the equipment.
So, John, thank you for your time.
You're very welcome.
This has been extremely useful and relevant, obviously. So, Ministry of Sailing, both the website and your YouTube channel, is where everybody should go. They should have it as a favorite tab and that sort of thing, bookmark as favorite tab, because there's a ton of information there. And I really appreciate what you do for the sailing community for this. I think it's fantastic, both in terms of the safety aspect, and also you're really good at sharing relevant, interesting information for sailors. I think it's probably from your Instagram. I think is pretty powerful. So thank you for doing that.
Well, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be part of a community, and that's what I try to do. I try to enhance our community. Everyone's against us sailors. We stick together, and that's the other thing. We're a subculture that unfortunately isn't getting bigger. So we need to do everything we can to promote the safety. All right, and also our togetherness. We can criticize all we want, but we're all sailors. At the end of the day, we have to be together, and it's okay to disagree with somebody. All right, but it's not okay to dislike somebody. The importance is to understand the difference between disliking and disagree.
That's so relevant in today's world.
That's exactly right, man.
Well, thanks, John. Again, appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you
Cheers,
on
mate.
the water on the shore.
I owe you a beer.
No, I owe you beers.
All right. Cheers, mate.
Thank you.